There are moments in life that shatter you so completely. You're certain the pieces will never fit together again. Moments that divide your entire existence into before and after. For Fiona Mallister, that moment came on a rain-soaked November evening, when the man she loved looked her in the eyes and said 4 words that would echo in her mind for exactly 364 days. This was a mistake. Edmund Ashford walked away that night believing he was doing the noble thing, believing that sacrifice equaled love, believing that time would heal what he had broken. He was wrong about all of it, because 1 year later, on another November evening, fate would force them into the same room. And one glance, just one single glance across a crowded ballroom, would prove that some things don't heal. They simply learn to breathe around the pain. But what Edmund didn't know, what Fiona had hidden in her silence and carried alone through sleepless nights, was the real reason she had let him go so easily. And tonight, in a few short hours, all of it would come crashing down. The Worthington Charity Gala was the kind of event Fiona would have avoided if she'd had any choice in the matter. Crystal chandeliers, designer gowns, people who measured their worth in connections and bank accounts. A year ago, she would have dragged Edmund to something like this and spent the entire evening making sarcastic comments in his ear about the pretentious small talk. A year ago, everything had been different. Now she stood in the marble entryway of the Grand Hotel ballroom, smoothing down the emerald silk dress her cousin Margaret had insisted she wear, and tried to remember how to breathe normally. She had transformed herself over the past 12 months into someone who looked like she had her life together. Her hair was styled in soft waves instead of the messy bun she preferred. Her makeup was flawless, covering the dark circles that came from too many nights lying awake. She had learned to wear success like armor, to walk into rooms with her head high and her shoulders back, to smile at strangers and make conversation about nothing at all. But underneath the polish and the professional accomplishments and the carefully constructed facade, she was still the same broken person who had walked out of that coffee shop into the rain and let the water hide her tears. Margaret appeared at her elbow, squeezing her arm gently. "You look beautiful," her cousin said, though her eyes held concern. Margaret was the only person who knew the whole truth, who had held Fiona through the worst of it, who understood that tonight was about more than just attending a charity event. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" Fiona nodded, not trusting her voice. She hadn't known Edmund would be here. The invitation had come through her gallery, a request for her to speak briefly about the art collection being auctioned for charity. She had agreed weeks ago before she knew, before someone casually mentioned that Edmund Ashford's architectural firm was one of the major sponsors. By then it was too late to back out without looking weak, without admitting that seeing him still had the power to undo her completely. So she had decided to face it, to prove to herself that she had survived, that she was strong enough to be in the same room with him without falling apart. She was wrong about that too. Edmund saw her first. He was standing near the bar, barely listening to a colleague drone on about some project deadline, when something made him look toward the entrance. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was the universe being cruel. Whatever it was, his gaze found her across the crowded ballroom, and the glass in his hand suddenly felt too heavy. The world tilted sideways. Everything, the music, the conversations, the clinking of champagne glasses, all of it faded into white noise. There was only her, Fiona. After a year of searching for her face in crowds, of seeing her in every woman with dark hair, of reaching for his phone 1,000 times and stopping himself, there she was, real, solid, more beautiful than his memories had allowed her to be. She had changed. There was something harder in the set of her jaw, something guarded in the way she held herself. The softness he remembered had been replaced by sharp edges and careful control. But her eyes, God, her eyes were the same, dark and deep and full of everything she never said out loud. He watched as she scanned the room, clearly looking for someone, or maybe looking for an escape route. And then their eyes met. The moment stretched and twisted. For Fiona it felt like being underwater. like drowning in front of hundreds of people who had no idea she couldn't breathe. Edmund's face went through a series of expressions she couldn't quite read. Shock, definitely. Something that might have been pain. Something else that looked almost like hope, which was ridiculous because hope required the possibility of something better, and there was nothing better waiting for them. There was only the wreckage of what they'd had, and the secrets she'd kept, and the year of silence that sat between them like a wall neither of them knew how to climb. She broke eye contact first, turning sharply to Margaret and gripping her cousin's hand hard enough to hurt. "I didn't know," she whispered, her voice coming out strange and tight. "Margaret, I can't do this. I can't be here." Margaret's response was gentle but firm. "Yes, you can. You're stronger than you think you are, Fiona. You've survived the worst of it. You can survive this too." But could she? Could she really stand in this room with him, knowing what she knew, carrying what she carried? Could she make small talk and smile at strangers while the man who had broken her heart watched from across the room? Could she pretend that seeing him didn't make her want to run or scream, or, maybe terrifyingly, walk straight to him and ask if he'd thought about her even half as much as she'd thought about him? Edmund couldn't move. His colleague had stopped talking, following Edmund's gaze to see what had captured his attention so completely. "You all right, Ashford?" the man asked, but Edmund barely heard him. His entire body had gone numb with the realization that nothing, absolutely nothing, had healed in the past year. He had told himself he was over her. He had thrown himself into work, redesigned his entire life, cut ties with his mother's expectations, built a new firm from the ground up. He had dated someone briefly, a perfectly nice woman his friends had set him up with, and felt absolutely nothing. He had convinced himself that time and distance had done their job, that he had moved on, that the guilt and regret had faded into something manageable. He had been lying to himself, because seeing Fiona now, standing 50 feet away in a green dress that reminded him of the first time they'd met, he understood with brutal clarity that he had made the worst mistake of his life. And he had no idea how to fix it, or if it could even be fixed at all. The gala continued around them. People laughed and sipped expensive wine, and made donations that would earn them tax deductions and social capital. The string quartet played something classical and forgettable. Waiters circulated with trays of appetizers that probably cost more than most people's grocery bills. And in the middle of it all, two people who had once known each other better than anyone moved through the crowd like magnets with reversed polarity, always aware of exactly where the other person was, carefully maintaining distance, orbiting each other in wider and wider circles. Fiona accepted a glass of champagne she wouldn't drink and made conversation with donors whose names she immediately forgot. Edmund shook hands and smiled, and felt like he was watching himself from outside his body, going through motions that meant nothing. Both of them knew it was only a matter of time. The ballroom wasn't big enough for them to avoid each other all night. Eventually, inevitably, they would have to speak. They would have to acknowledge what had happened between them. And when they did, when they finally faced each other after a year of silence and regret and secrets, everything was going to fall apart. But neither of them knew just how much. Neither of them knew that before this night was over, truths would be spoken that couldn't be taken back. That Fiona would finally tell Edmund what his choice had cost. That Edmund would have to face the consequences of his cowardice. That they would both discover that sometimes the only way forward is straight through the pain you've been trying so hard to avoid. To understand how they arrived at this moment, standing in the same room but worlds apart, we need to go back. Back to where it all began. Back to a summer afternoon 1 year ago, when Fiona Mallister walked into an art gallery and met a man who would change everything. 1 year earlier, on a perfect June afternoon, Fiona Mallister was doing what she loved most in the world. She was standing in the center of the Morrison Gallery in downtown Chicago, surrounded by paintings that took her breath away, explaining to a small group of potential donors why art mattered. She had moved from Scotland 6 months earlier to take her dream job as the gallery's new curator, and she was finally starting to feel like she belonged. Her accent still turned heads, her directness still caught people off guard, but she had stopped apologizing for taking up space. This was her gallery, her exhibition, her moment. She was wearing a simple black dress and her favorite boots, her dark hair pulled back in a way that was supposed to look professional, but had already started falling apart. She didn't care. When she talked about art, everything else disappeared. Edmund Ashford had not wanted to come to the gallery opening. His assistant had put it on his calendar with 3 reminder notifications because she knew he would try to skip it. Some family friend was on the board, and his mother had called twice to make sure he would attend and make a good impression. Edmund was 30 years old, ran a successful architecture firm, and still couldn't say no to his mother. So he showed up, planning to stay exactly 20 minutes, write a check, and leave. That plan lasted about 5 minutes, right up until he heard a woman with a Scottish accent absolutely destroy someone's interpretation of a painting. "With all due respect," she was saying to a man in an expensive suit, "if you think this piece is just about color and composition, you're missing the entire point. Look at the brushstrokes here, the way the artist built up layers. This isn't decoration. This is rage and grief and hope all fighting for space on the same canvas. This is what it looks like when someone refuses to give up, even when everything is falling apart." The man looked offended. Edmund found himself fascinated. He waited until the group dispersed, then walked over to where she stood studying a different painting. "That was quite a speech," he said. She turned, and he got his first real look at her. She wasn't beautiful in the conventional sense. Her features were too strong, her expression too direct. But there was something about her that made it impossible to look away. Intelligence, maybe. Passion, definitely. She looked at him like she could see straight through whatever polite mask he was wearing. "Was it too much?" she asked, though she didn't sound particularly concerned. "I've been told I can be a bit intense about art." Edmund smiled, a real smile, not the automatic one he used at business dinners. "I liked it. Most people here are just pretending to care so they can put photos on social media. You actually mean it?" She studied him for a moment, then held out her hand. "Fiona Mallister. I'm the curator, which means I'm responsible for the intense speeches." He shook her hand, noticing she had paint under her fingernails. "Edmund Ashford. I'm an architect, which means I'm supposed to have opinions about spatial relationships and structural integrity. But honestly, I don't know much about art." "Then why are you here?" she asked bluntly. He appreciated that she didn't bother with small talk. "My mother's on the board. Family obligation," Fiona laughed, a genuine sound that made several people turn to look. "At least you're honest about it. Most people pretend they came because they're passionate supporters of the arts." They stood there talking for 40 minutes, which turned into an hour, which turned into Edmund completely forgetting he had planned to leave. She challenged everything he said, made him defend opinions he hadn't known he had, and somehow made him feel more awake than he had in months. When the event started winding down, Edmund did something he almost never did. He asked her to dinner. Fiona hesitated, and he could see her weighing the decision. "I don't usually," she started, then stopped. "I'm not really looking for anything right now. I just moved here, I'm focused on my career, and I don't have time for complicated." Edmund nodded, trying not to feel disappointed. "I understand. It was just dinner, but no pressure." She looked at him for a long moment, then surprised them both. "Okay, one dinner. But I'm buying my own meal, and if you turn out to be boring, I'm leaving." He grinned. "Fair enough." That dinner turned into coffee the next morning, which turned into a walk through the city, which turned into hours sitting on a bench by the lake talking about everything and nothing. Fiona told him about growing up in Scotland, about her complicated relationship with her family, about how art had saved her when nothing else made sense. Edmund told her about the pressure of family expectations, about designing buildings he didn't care about feeling like he was living someone else's life. They discovered they were both afraid of the same things: vulnerability, disappointment, losing themselves in someone else's expectations. 3 weeks later, they were inseparable. Edmund's friends barely recognized him. He laughed more, argued more, actually had opinions about things that mattered. Fiona's cousin Margaret, who had worried about her moving to a new city alone, watched with relief as Fiona let someone in for the first time in years. They met each other's friends, shared their favorite places, stayed up until 3 in the morning talking about everything from philosophy to their most embarrassing childhood memories. Edmund took her to architectural landmarks she had walked past 100 times without really seeing. Fiona dragged him to tiny galleries and made him look at art until he started understanding what she saw. They fit together in a way that surprised them both. Not perfectly, they argued constantly, but in a way that felt right, like two puzzle pieces that had been cut from the same picture. On a rooftop one August evening, watching the sunset paint the city gold, Edmund kissed her for the first time. It was gentle and terrifying and absolutely right. When they pulled apart, Fiona was crying, which she never did. "I'm scared," she whispered. Edmund understood exactly what she meant. This mattered too much. They had both been careful for so long, protecting themselves, and now suddenly they were completely exposed. "Me too," he said, and kissed her again. For 3 perfect months they were happy. Genuinely, surprisingly, almost impossibly happy. But perfection, like glass, is beautiful and fragile, and Edmund's family was about to apply exactly the right amount of pressure to shatter everything. The first time Fiona met Edmund's mother, she knew immediately that she was going to be a problem. Lady Catherine Ashford, though no one actually called her that in America, carried herself like royalty forced to live among commoners. She had invited them to dinner at her sprawling house in the suburbs, and Fiona had tried to dress appropriately, wearing a conservative navy dress and even attempting to tame her hair into something resembling elegance. It hadn't mattered. The moment Catherine opened the door, her eyes had swept over Fiona with the kind of assessment usually reserved for livestock auctions, and Fiona had seen the verdict written clearly on her face. Not good enough. Dinner was excruciating. Catherine asked questions that sounded polite, but carried daggers underneath. Where exactly in Scotland was Fiona from? What did her father do? Had she attended university, and if so, where? Each answer Fiona gave seemed to confirm something Catherine had already decided. Edmund tried to steer the conversation to safer topics, but his mother was relentless. She mentioned casually that the daughter of family friends had just returned from Paris, where she'd been studying art history at the Sorbonne. "Such a lovely girl, Edmund. You remember Amanda, don't you? Her family and ours have been close for generations." Edmund's jaw tightened, but he just nodded and changed the subject. On the drive home, Fiona stared out the window in silence. "She hates me," she finally said. Edmund reached for her hand. "She doesn't hate you. She's just protective. She'll come around." But Fiona heard the doubt in his voice, and it scared her more than his mother's obvious disapproval. The dinners continued, each one more uncomfortable than the last. Catherine developed a talent for the subtle insult, the comment that sounded almost like a compliment until you really thought about it. "It's so refreshing that you're not afraid to speak your mind, Fiona. Most young women are so concerned with being appropriate." Or, "Edmund's father always said that breeding tells." Of course he meant horses, but the principle applies, doesn't it? Fiona endured it because she loved Edmund, but she noticed that he never quite defended her the way she needed him to. He would deflect, change the subject, smooth things over, but he never once looked his mother in the eye and told her to stop. After one particularly awful dinner, where Catherine had spent 20 minutes praising Amanda's accomplishments, Fiona confronted him in his apartment. "I can't keep doing this, Edmund. Your mother treats me like I'm some gold digger who trapped you, and you just sit there and let her." Edmund looked exhausted. "What do you want me to do, Fiona? She's my mother. I can't just tell her to shut up." "Yes, you can," Fiona shot back. You absolutely can. But you won't because part of you thinks she might be right. The words hung in the air between them, sharp and dangerous. That's not fair, Edmund said quietly. I choose you. I'm here with you, aren't I? But his voice lacked conviction, and Fiona heard everything he wasn't saying. The real pressure came in September, during a family dinner that Edmund had tried to cancel but couldn't. His mother had invited her business partners, the Harringtons, who just happened to bring their daughter Amanda. It was so obviously orchestrated that Fiona almost laughed. Amanda was everything Catherine wanted. Old money, perfect pedigree, impeccable manners. She and Edmund had grown up together, attended the same private schools, moved in the same social circles. She was beautiful in an understated way, with blonde hair and blue eyes, and the kind of confidence that came from never being told she wasn't good enough. Watching Edmund talk to her, seeing how easily they communicated in their shared language of privilege and tradition, Fiona felt something crack inside her chest. This was his world. These were his people. And no matter how much he claimed to love her, she would always be the outsider looking in. After dinner, Catherine cornered Edmund in his father's old study, while Fiona waited in the living room pretending not to notice. She couldn't hear the exact words, but she heard the tone. Catherine's voice sharp and insistent. Edmund's, defensive but weakening. When Edmund finally emerged, he looked pale and shaken. On the drive home he was quiet, his hands gripping the steering wheel too tightly. "What did your mother say to you?" Fiona asked. Edmund kept his eyes on the road. "She's worried about me, about my future. The firm has an opportunity to merge with the Harrington Group, and she thinks I should consider all my options." Fiona's stomach dropped. "Options? You mean Amanda?" "I mean everything," Edmund said, but he still wouldn't look at her. "My mother thinks I'm throwing away my future for something that won't last." "And what do you think?" Fiona asked, her voice steady even though her heart was breaking. Edmund didn't answer, and his silence told her everything she needed to know. Over the next few weeks, Edmund started pulling away. He cancelled dates because of work emergencies. He was distracted when they were together, checking his phone constantly, his mind somewhere else. They stopped having the long conversations that had brought them together in the first place. When they did talk, they argued about stupid things, surface issues that were really about the deeper problem neither of them wanted to address. Fiona could feel him slipping away, could see him retreating back into the safe, appropriate life his mother had planned for him, and she knew with a certainty that made her physically ill that she was about to lose him. She just didn't know that when it happened, on a cold November night 3 weeks later, it would hurt even worse than she imagined. And she definitely didn't know that 2 weeks after he walked away, she would discover something that would change everything. The ultimatum came on a Tuesday afternoon in early November. Edmund sat in his mother's formal living room, the same room where he'd played as a child, and listened to her lay out his choices with the precision of a lawyer presenting a case. Catherine had always been strategic, but this was different. This was war. "The Harrington merger is on the table, Edmund. Real opportunity, the kind that comes once in a lifetime. But Richard Harrington is old-fashioned. He believes in family values, in tradition. He's not going to partner with someone who's involved in an inappropriate relationship." Edmund's head snapped up. Inappropriate? "Fiona is a respected curator. She's intelligent, successful." "She's nobody," Catherine interrupted, her voice cold. "No family, no connections, no breeding. She's a distraction, and she's keeping you from the life you were meant to have." Edmund stood up, anger finally breaking through his usual restraint. "This is my life, Mother, mine, not yours." Catherine's expression didn't change. "Then live it. Choose this girl if you want, but understand what you're choosing. You'll lose the merger. You'll lose the respect of everyone in our circle. And you'll lose me." The words hit him like a physical blow. "You don't mean that." "I absolutely do," Catherine said, and for the first time Edmund saw something that looked almost like pain in her eyes. "Your father made me promise before he died that I would make sure you didn't throw your life away, that I would protect the Ashford name, the legacy we built. This girl is not part of that legacy, Edmund. She never will be. Edmund left his mother's house feeling like he couldn't breathe. He drove aimlessly for an hour, his mind spinning through impossible calculations. He loved Fiona, he knew that, but he also heard his father's voice in his head, the deathbed conversation about responsibility and duty and carrying on the family name. He thought about the firm, about the employees who depended on him, about the legacy his parents had built. And he thought about Fiona's face that night after dinner, the way she'd looked at him and asked what he thought, and how he hadn't been able to answer. Maybe his mother was right. Maybe he was being selfish. Fiona deserved someone who could give her everything. Someone without all these complications and expectations and family drama. Someone who could choose her without hesitation, without doubt. And if he couldn't be that person, wasn't the kindest thing to let her go. By the time he texted Fiona asking to meet that evening, he had convinced himself he was doing the noble thing. He was setting her free. He was protecting her from a lifetime of dealing with his mother's disapproval and his own weakness. He told himself he was being selfless. He was actually just being a coward. They met at their usual coffee shop, the little place near Fiona's apartment where they'd had their second date. The moment she walked in, Edmund knew she suspected something. She sat down across from him, her eyes already guarded, her body language defensive. "What's going on, Edmund?" she asked quietly. He couldn't look at her. He stared at his untouched coffee and started the speech he'd rehearsed. "I've been thinking a lot about us, about where this is going, and I don't think it's working." The words came out wrong, too harsh, too cold. He tried again. "You're amazing, Fiona. You are. But my life, my family situation, it's too complicated. You deserve better than this." "Better than what?" Fiona asked, her voice steady even though her hands were shaking. "Better than someone who can't stand up to his mother. Better than someone who's going to choose a business merger over the person he claims to love." Edmund flinched. "That's not fair, isn't it?" Fiona leaned forward, and he finally forced himself to meet her eyes. "Just say it, Edmund. Say what you really mean." He took a breath, and then he said the words that would haunt them both. "This was a mistake. It was a mistake." For a moment, Fiona just stared at him. He watched something die in her eyes, watched her face go carefully blank. When she finally spoke, her voice was eerily calm. "Is this really what you want?" Every part of him wanted to say no, to take it back, to reach across the table and tell her he was being an idiot. Instead, he heard himself say yes. Fiona nodded once, then stood up. She picked up her coat, and Edmund noticed her hands were steady now, steadier than his. "Then there's nothing more to say." She walked toward the door, and Edmund sat frozen, watching her leave. At the last second, she turned back. "You know what the saddest part is? I would have fought for you. I would have dealt with your mother, with the judgment, with all of it. But I won't fight for someone who won't fight for me." Then she was gone, disappearing into the November rain. Edmund sat in that coffee shop for another hour, staring at nothing, telling himself he'd done the right thing. He went home, ignored his mother's congratulatory text message, and poured himself a drink he didn't want. For the first few days, he almost believed his own justifications. Fiona was better off. He had freed her from his family's toxicity. He had made the mature, responsible choice. But late at night, alone in his apartment that suddenly felt too empty, he knew the truth. He hadn't been noble. He hadn't been selfless. He had been terrified of choosing love over approval, terrified of disappointing his mother, terrified of being brave. And now Fiona was gone, and he had no one to blame but himself. What Edmund didn't know, what he couldn't possibly know, was that 2 weeks after that conversation, Fiona sat in a doctor's office and heard words that shattered her world all over again. "You're pregnant. About 6 weeks along." She walked out of that office in a daze, got on the train going the wrong direction and ended up at Margaret's apartment without knowing how she got there. When Margaret opened the door and saw Fiona's face, she pulled her inside without a word. "I'm pregnant," Fiona whispered, and then she started crying for the first time since Edmund had walked away. "I'm pregnant and he's gone and I don't know what to do." Margaret held her while she sobbed, and when Fiona finally calmed down enough to speak, she said the words that would define the next year of her life. "I can't tell him. If I tell him, he'll come back out of obligation, out of duty, and I won't do that. I won't trap him. I won't be the reason he resents his entire life." Over the next week, Fiona made the hardest decision she had ever made. She scheduled an appointment at a clinic. She went through the procedure alone, with only Margaret knowing where she was. And she buried the grief so deep that sometimes she could almost pretend it had never happened. Almost. This was the secret she carried. This was the choice that Edmund's mistake had forced her to make. This was the real reason she had let him go so easily. Because staying would have meant telling him, and telling him would have meant a lifetime of wondering if he'd stayed for her, or for a child neither of them had planned. For exactly 364 days, Fiona lived with this knowledge alone, until tonight, when fate put them in the same room and everything came crashing down. The year that followed the breakup was the longest of Fiona's life. She threw herself into work with an intensity that worried even Margaret. She curated 2 major exhibitions, brought in record donations, and earned a reputation as one of the most promising young curators in Chicago. On paper, she was thriving. In reality, she was barely surviving. She went through the motions of healing the way doctors had told her to. She attended therapy sessions where she talked about everything except the secret she carried. She went on dates that Margaret set up, sitting across from perfectly nice men and feeling absolutely nothing. She learned to sleep again, though she still woke up sometimes at 3 in the morning with tears on her face and no memory of the dreams that caused them. She got good at lying to people who asked if she was okay. She smiled at gallery openings and made small talk at fundraisers and pretended that she was fine. Absolutely fine. Completely moved on. The only person who knew the truth was Margaret, who would find her cousin sitting in the dark sometimes, just staring at nothing, and knew better than to ask questions. Edmund's year was different, but somehow the same. He had gotten exactly what his mother wanted. He walked away from Fiona, focused on the business, and was miserable every single day. The Harrington merger went through, making his firm one of the most successful in the city. He won awards, got featured in architecture magazines, designed buildings that people called brilliant, and none of it meant anything. For the first few months, he tried to convince himself he'd made the right choice. He even dated Amanda Harrington for exactly 3 months, a relationship that felt like performing in a play where everyone knew their lines except him. Amanda was lovely, appropriate, everything his mother had wanted. And Edmund felt nothing. When he ended it, Amanda had looked almost relieved, like she'd been pretending too. His mother was furious, but Edmund discovered something surprising. He no longer cared about her approval. Losing Fiona had broken something in him, but it had also freed him in a strange way. He started saying no to his mother's demands. He made decisions without consulting her. 6 months after the breakup, he left his family's firm entirely and started his own practice. It was smaller, less prestigious, but it was his. His mother barely spoke to him anymore, which hurt less than he'd expected. But none of these accomplishments filled the emptiness Fiona had left behind. Edmund carried his phone everywhere, hoping for a message that never came. He had tried to reach out once, 2 months after the breakup, but found she'd blocked his number. He'd driven by her gallery 3 times, parking across the street like a stalker, trying to work up the courage to go in. He never did. She had asked him if it was what he really wanted, and he had said yes. He had made his choice, and now he had to live with it. Late at night, alone in his apartment, He would pull up the one photo he had of them together, taken at the lakefront that perfect August day. They looked so happy it hurt to see. He had destroyed that happiness, and he didn't know how to forgive himself. His friends noticed the change in him. His work became more emotional, more raw. One colleague told him his designs had finally developed a soul, and Edmund almost laughed at the irony. He'd found his soul by losing the only person who'd ever really seen it. Now, 1 year later, they were both at the same gala, and the universe had decided it was time for them to face what they'd been running from. After that first devastating glance across the ballroom, both of them tried to maintain distance. Fiona positioned herself near the art displays, playing her role as curator, explaining pieces to donors with the same passion Edmund remembered. He watched her from across the room, noting every small change. The way she held herself differently, more guarded. The shadows under her eyes that makeup couldn't quite hide. The absence of the easy smile she used to give so freely. Edmund made small talk with sponsors and signed checks, and felt like he was underwater. Everything muffled and distant except his awareness of exactly where Fiona was at every moment. She was talking to an older couple near a sculpture, gesturing with her hands the way she always did when she got excited about art. For just a second, he saw a glimpse of the woman he'd fallen in love with, and it made his chest ache. The formal program began, forcing everyone to take their seats. Edmund found himself positioned with a clear sightline to where Fiona sat 3 rows ahead and to the left. She must have felt his gaze because her shoulders tensed, though she didn't turn around. The speeches dragged on. Something about the importance of supporting the arts, about community and culture, and giving back. Edmund heard none of it. He was too busy watching the back of Fiona's head, watching her whisper something to Margaret beside her, watching her reach up once to touch her temple like she had a headache. He knew that gesture. She used to do it when she was stressed or overwhelmed. He used to massage her temples until the tension released, and she'd lean back against him with a sigh of relief. The memory was so vivid, he could almost feel her hair against his chest, could almost smell her shampoo. God, he'd been such an idiot, such a coward. He'd convinced himself he was protecting her, setting her free, doing the noble thing. But there was nothing noble about breaking someone's heart, because you were too afraid to fight for them. When the program finally ended, people stood and began milling around, heading for the reception area where cocktails and appetizers waited. Edmund lost sight of Fiona in the crowd, then spotted her near the windows, clearly trying to find an escape route. He made a decision. He'd spent a year respecting her silence, giving her space, living with his regrets. But now she was here, real and present and close enough to talk to, and he couldn't waste this chance. He started moving through the crowd toward her, his heart pounding like he was about to jump off a cliff. Maybe he was. Before he could reach her, a donor intercepted them both, an older woman on the gallery board who apparently knew Edmund's mother. "Mr. Ashford, Miss Mallister, wonderful. You two should absolutely know each other. Edmund's firm is doing the most innovative work, and Fiona's vision for the gallery has been transformative." They both froze, trapped by social convention. The woman beamed at them, oblivious to the tension crackling in the air. Edmund recovered first, extending his hand with automatic politeness. "We've met, actually." Fiona had no choice but to shake his hand. Her fingers were ice-cold, and Edmund felt the brief contact like an electric shock. "Yes," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "It's been a while." The donor chatted for another excruciating minute before finally moving on. Edmund and Fiona stood there in awkward silence, not quite looking at each other. "Fiona, Edmund started. "Don't," she cut him off, her voice sharp. "Please don't." Then she turned and walked quickly toward the terrace doors, clearly needing air or space or an escape from this conversation. Edmund watched her go and made another decision. He followed her outside, into the November night that felt exactly like the November night when he'd ruined everything. This time he wasn't going to walk away. The terrace was empty. the November air cold enough that most guests had stayed inside. Fiona stood at the railing, her arms wrapped around herself, staring out at the city lights without really seeing them. She heard the door open behind her, and knew without turning that it was Edmund. Of course it was. The universe was apparently determined to torture her tonight. "We need to talk," Edmund said quietly. Fiona kept her back to him. "No, we really don't. You said what you needed to say a year ago. I think we're done. Fiona, please. Just 5 minutes. Why?" She finally turned to face him, and the anger she'd been holding back all night surged up. "What could you possibly have to say to me now, Edmund? It's been a year. You made your choice. I accepted it. We both moved on. End of story." "Except we didn't move on," Edmund said, taking a step closer. "At least I didn't. And I don't think you did either." Fiona laughed, a harsh sound with no humor in it. "You don't get to know what I did or didn't do. You lost that right when you walked away." Edmund absorbed that like a blow, but he didn't retreat. "You're right, I know. But I need to say this anyway, even if you hate me for it. I was wrong, Fiona, about everything. Congratulations on your self-awareness." "Is that all?" Her voice dripped with sarcasm, a defense mechanism he recognized. She was trying to keep him at a distance, trying to stay angry because anger was safer than the alternative. "I was a coward," he continued, his voice rough with emotion. "I let my mother manipulate me. I let fear make my decisions. I convinced myself I was protecting you, that I was being noble by walking away, but that was bullshit. I was just too scared to fight for what we had." Fiona's composure cracked slightly. "You think I don't know that? You think I didn't see exactly what you were doing?" "You weren't protecting me, Edmund. You were protecting yourself." "I know," he said quietly. "I know that now. Every single day for the past year I've regretted it. Every day I've wanted to call you to apologize, to beg you to give me another chance. But you blocked my number, and I figured that was what I deserved. You told me you wouldn't fight for someone who wouldn't fight for you, and you were right. I didn't fight. I just gave up." The raw honesty in his voice made Fiona's eyes sting with tears she refused to let fall. "Why are you telling me this now? What do you want from me?" "I don't want anything," Edmund said. "I just need you to know that losing you was the biggest mistake of my life. Not being with you, you were never the mistake, Fiona. Walking away from you was." Fiona turned away from him, gripping the railing so hard her knuckles turned white. For a moment she couldn't speak. When she finally found her voice, it shook with barely controlled emotion. "You walked away like I meant nothing, like what we had was just some inconvenient complication in your perfectly planned life. Do you have any idea what that did to me?" "I know I hurt you," Edmund said. "And I'm sorry." "God, Fiona, I'm so sorry." "Sorry doesn't fix it," Fiona shot back, whirling to face him. "Sorry doesn't undo the damage. You don't get to show up a year later with apologies and expect everything to be okay." "I don't expect that," Edmund said. "I know it's not okay. I know I destroyed what we had, but I needed you to know the truth. I didn't stop loving you, Fiona. Not for a single day. I was just too much of a coward to choose you over everything else." Fiona felt something break inside her chest. The words she'd wanted to hear for a year were finally being said, but they came too late, cost too much. "You want the truth, Edmund? Here's the truth. Yes, you hurt me. Yes, you broke my heart. But you know what the worst part was? You made me doubt myself. You made me feel like I wasn't enough. Like I would never be enough for someone like you. Like my love wasn't worth fighting for." Edmund moved closer, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "You were always enough. You were more than enough. The problem was never you. It was me and my weakness and my inability to be brave enough for what we had." "Then why?" Fiona's voice broke. "Why couldn't you just choose me?" "Because I was terrified," Edmund admitted. "Terrified of disappointing my mother. Terrified of losing the life I'd always known. Terrified that if I chose you, I'd fail somehow, and you'd end up hating me anyway. So I made the worst choice possible. I chose fear over love, and I've paid for it every single day since." The silence that followed was heavy with everything they weren't saying. Fiona could feel herself weakening, feel the anger that had sustained her starting to crack. But underneath the anger was something much more dangerous, the pain she'd been trying so hard to bury. And underneath that pain was the secret she'd carried alone for a year, the truth that Edmund still didn't know. "There's more," she said quietly. "What you did, what your choice cost me, it's more than just a broken heart." Edmund went very still. "What do you mean?" Fiona looked at him, and for the first time all night, let him see the full weight of what she'd carried. "There's something I never told you. Something you don't know about what happened after you left." "Tell me," Edmund said, his voice barely above a whisper. Fiona opened her mouth to speak, then stopped. Fear paralyzed her. If she told him, everything would change. He would know what his cowardice had cost them both. He would carry that guilt forever. And maybe that's exactly what he deserved. But saying it out loud would make it real again, in a way she'd spent a year trying to escape. "You don't deserve to know," she finally said, her voice hard. She started to walk past him, back toward the safety of the crowded ballroom where they could hide behind social pleasantries and pretend this conversation never happened. Edmund caught her arm gently. "Fiona, please. Whatever it is, tell me." She yanked her arm away, and the movement broke something loose inside her. All the pain and anger and grief she'd been holding back came flooding up. "You want to know? Fine. 2 weeks after you walked away, after you decided we were a mistake, I found out I was pregnant." The words hung in the cold November air like a bomb that had just detonated. Edmund's face went white. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Fiona kept going, the words pouring out now that she'd started. "I was pregnant and you were gone, and I had to make a choice. The hardest choice I've ever made. I could tell you and trap you into a life you clearly didn't want, into being with me out of obligation instead of love. But I could handle it myself." Edmund's legs seemed to give out. He sank down onto the bench behind him, his head in his hands. "Fiona," he whispered. "I didn't keep it," she said, her voice breaking. I couldn't raise a child alone while you married someone appropriate and built the life your mother wanted. I couldn't watch you resent me for ruining your plans. So I made the choice you forced me to make. And that, Edmund, that's what your mistake cost." Edmund couldn't breathe. He sat on that bench with his head in his hands, Fiona's words echoing in his mind like a nightmare he couldn't wake up from. Pregnant. She'd been pregnant. And she'd gone through it alone because he'd been too much of a coward to choose her. The magnitude of what he'd done, what his choice had cost them both, crashed over him in waves. This wasn't just about a broken relationship anymore. This was about a future that had been destroyed before it even had a chance to exist. "Oh God," he whispered. "Fiona, oh God." He looked up at her, and the devastation on his face almost made her regret telling him. Almost, but he deserved to know. He deserved to understand exactly what his noble sacrifice had actually sacrificed. "You should have told me," Edmund said, his voice cracking. "You should have called me, texted me, anything." "I would have." "You would have what?" Fiona interrupted, her voice sharp even through her own tears. "Come back out of obligation. Stayed with me because you felt guilty. Spent the rest of your life wondering what you gave up. I've seen that marriage, Edmund. My parents had it. My father stayed because of duty, and my mother knew it every single day. It poisoned everything. I wouldn't do that to a child, and I wouldn't do it to myself." Edmund stood up, his legs shaky, and tried to move toward her, but Fiona held up a hand to stop him. Don't try to comfort me or tell me it would have been different. You already showed me who you were when it mattered. You chose your mother's approval over us. What makes you think a baby would have changed that?" "Because it would have," Edmund said desperately. "Fiona, I would have chosen you. I would have chosen both of you. God, if I had known—" "But you didn't know," Fiona said, "because you were already gone. You'd already decided I wasn't worth fighting for. And I wasn't going to use a pregnancy to force you into a life you'd made clear you didn't want. The truth of her words hit Edmund like a physical blow. She was right. He had already chosen to walk away. He had already shown her that his fear was stronger than his love. If she had told him about the pregnancy, he would have stayed, yes. But she would have spent forever wondering if he was only there because he had to be, not because he wanted to be. I can't breathe, Edmund said, suddenly sitting back down. I can't, knowing what I cost us. Knowing what you went through alone because I was too weak to be what you needed. He looked up at her, tears streaming down his face without shame. Were you alone when you... He couldn't finish the sentence. Fiona's expression softened slightly. Margaret was with me. She's the only one who knows. She held my hand and drove me home and let me cry for 3 days straight. Edmund made a sound that was half sob, half groan. I'm so sorry. Fiona, I'm so sorry. I know that doesn't fix anything. I know sorry is completely inadequate for what I did, for what you had to go through because of me. But I need you to know, I would have wanted it. I would have wanted both of you. I was an idiot and a coward, but I would have chosen you if I'd known. But you didn't choose me when it was just me, Fiona said quietly. That's the point, Edmund. I wasn't enough on my own. And a baby shouldn't have to be the reason someone stays. They sat in silence, both of them crying now, both of them processing a grief that was a year old, but felt fresh and raw. The terrace door opened, and someone started to come out, saw them, and quickly retreated. They were alone again with the wreckage of what might have been. How do you live with it? Edmund finally asked. How do you get up every day knowing what happened? Fiona wiped her eyes. Her makeup probably ruined, but she didn't care anymore. Badly, I live with it badly. Some days are okay, and I can almost pretend it never happened. Other days I wake up, and the first thought in my head is that I would have had a 7-month-old by now, or that the baby would be starting to show, or that I'd be planning a nursery. The grief doesn't go away, Edmund. You just learn to carry it. Edmund reached for her hand, and this time she didn't pull away. Her fingers were cold, and he wrapped both his hands around hers, trying to offer what little warmth and comfort he could. I'm so sorry, he said again, because there were no other words adequate for what he'd done. I know, Fiona whispered. They sat like that for a long moment, two people who had loved each other and destroyed each other, holding hands in the cold November air. Finally, Edmund spoke. I don't have any right to ask you this. I know I don't. But is there any way, any possibility that we could try again? Fiona looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the changes the year had carved into his face. He looked older, sadder, like he'd been through his own kind of hell. I don't know if I can trust you again, she said honestly. Every time things got hard, I'd wonder if you were going to walk away again. I'd be waiting for you to choose something else over me. That's no way to live. I know, Edmund said. And I wouldn't blame you if you told me to go to hell and never spoke to me again. But I'm not the same person I was a year ago, Fiona. I left my mother's company. I started my own firm. I cut all the ties that were holding me to the life she wanted me to live. It's too late for us, I know that. But I needed you to know that you changed me. You made me want to be brave enough to live authentically, instead of just going through the motions of the life other people expected. Fiona felt tears sliding down her cheeks again. Why didn't you do that before? Why did you wait until after you'd destroyed us? Because I'm an idiot, Edmund said simply. Because sometimes people don't realize what they have until they've lost it. Because I thought I could have both, your love and my mother's approval. And when she forced me to choose, I chose wrong. And I've regretted it every single day since. The terrace door opened again, and this time Margaret stepped out. She took one look at them, at their tear-stained faces and clasped hands, and her expression softened. Fiona, they're about to start the auction. You're supposed to say a few words. Fiona nodded, pulling her hand gently from Edmund's grasp. She stood up, wiping her face, trying to compose herself enough to go back inside and pretend she was fine. "I have to go," she said to Edmund. He stood too. "Can I see you again? Can we talk more when we're not at a public event?" Fiona hesitated. Every rational part of her brain was screaming at her to say no, to walk away and protect herself. But there was a small, stubborn part of her that still loved him, that had never stopped loving him, and that part was tired of being alone with her grief. "I don't know," she said finally. "I need time to think about this, about all of this." "Take all the time you need," Edmund said. "I'll wait. I've already wasted a year being a coward. I can wait as long as it takes." Fiona nodded and followed Margaret back inside, leaving Edmund alone on the terrace. He stood there for a long time, staring out at the city lights, trying to process everything that had just happened. He had finally learned the truth, and it was so much worse than anything he'd imagined. But underneath the crushing guilt and grief, there was something else. Something small but persistent. She hadn't said no. She hadn't told him to leave her alone forever. She'd said she needed time to think, which meant there was still a chance, however small, that she might be willing to try again. Edmund pulled out his phone and typed a message, then stared at it for a long moment before hitting send. "Thank you for telling me. I know it cost you to share that. I'm here if you ever want to talk. No pressure, no expectations. Just here." Inside, Fiona felt her phone buzz. She pulled it out during a quiet moment, read Edmund's message, and felt something shift in her chest. She didn't respond, but she didn't block his number either. And that, for now, was enough. 2 weeks passed in silence. Edmund didn't push. He'd sent that one message, and then waited, giving Fiona the space she needed to process everything. He threw himself into work during the day, and lay awake at night thinking about everything she'd told him, everything they'd lost. The grief was overwhelming sometimes, grief for a future that never got to exist, for a child he'd never known about, for the pain Fiona had carried alone. But underneath the grief was something else, a determination he'd never felt before. If she gave him another chance, even just to talk, he wouldn't waste it. On a cold Tuesday afternoon, Edmund's phone buzzed with a message from a number he'd memorized but never thought he'd see again. "Coffee?" it said. Just one word, but it felt like the world had shifted. Edmund's hands shook as he typed back. "When and where?" 20 minutes later, he was walking into the same coffee shop where he'd ended everything a year ago. Fiona was already there, sitting at a corner table, 2 cups in front of her. She'd remembered how he took his coffee. That small detail felt enormous. "Hi," he said, sitting down across from her. "Hi," Fiona replied. She looked tired, like she hadn't been sleeping well. He probably looked the same. For a few minutes they just sat there, sipping coffee, not quite looking at each other. Finally, Fiona spoke. "I've been thinking about what you said, about how you've changed, about starting your own firm and cutting ties with your mother." Edmund nodded, not trusting himself to speak yet. "I want to believe you," Fiona continued, "but I'm scared, Edmund. I'm terrified of letting you back in and getting hurt again. I'm terrified that the next time things get hard, you'll run." "I understand," Edmund said quietly, "and I can't promise that everything will be perfect. I can't promise I won't make mistakes, but I can promise that I will never walk away from you again. I've learned what that costs, and I won't make that mistake twice." Fiona studied his face, searching for something. "I'm not the same person I was a year ago either. What happened, what I went through, it changed me. I'm harder now, more guarded. I don't know if I can ever fully trust someone again the way I trusted you before." "I don't expect you to," Edmund said. "Trust is earned, and I destroyed what we had. If you're willing to give me a chance to earn it back, I'll spend however long it takes proving that I mean what I say." They talked for 2 hours that afternoon, not about their relationship, not yet, but about their lives over the past year. Fiona told him about the exhibitions she'd curated, the artists she'd discovered, the ways she'd poured her grief into her work. Edmund told her about leaving his family's firm, about the guilt and relief he'd felt, about designing his first building as his own boss, and how empty the success had felt without her to share it with. When they finally left the coffee shop, Edmund walked her to her car. "Can I see you again?" he asked. Fiona hesitated, then nodded. "Same time next week." It became a routine. Every Tuesday afternoon they met for coffee. Sometimes they talked about heavy things, about the grief they both carried, about the mistakes that had led them here. Sometimes they talked about nothing important at all, about books and movies and the ridiculous politics at Fiona's gallery. Margaret approved cautiously. "Just be careful," she told Fiona after the third coffee date. "I don't want to see you hurt again." "I'm being careful," Fiona assured her. "We're just talking. Just trying to figure out if there's anything left worth saving." But they both knew it was more than that. The connection they'd had, the thing that had brought them together in the first place, it was still there. Different now, quieter, more careful but present. 3 months after the gala, in February when winter was at its coldest but spring felt like a possibility, Edmund invited Fiona to his office. "There's something I want to show you," he said. She was nervous walking into his building, into this space that was so completely his. His receptionist smiled and waved her through, and Fiona found Edmund in a large, light-filled office with drawings and models scattered everywhere. "This is nice," she said, looking around. "You've built something real here." "I wanted to show you something," Edmund said, guiding her to a large table in the corner. Spread across it was an architectural rendering, a beautiful design for a small garden space. It had curved pathways, a central fountain, benches positioned to catch the sun, and plantings that looked like they'd bloom in waves through the seasons. "It's beautiful," Fiona said. "What is it?" Edmund took a breath. "It's a memorial garden. I designed it for what we lost, for the child that never got to be. I needed to honor it somehow, even if we never build it, even if it just exists on paper. I needed to create something beautiful to remember something that mattered." Fiona stared at the rendering, and then she started crying. Not the angry tears or the grief-stricken tears she'd shed so many times over the past year, but something different, something that felt almost like healing. Edmund stood beside her, not touching her but close enough that she could feel his presence. "I'm sorry I never got to meet them," he said quietly. "I'm sorry I wasn't there when you needed me. I'm sorry for all of it." Fiona turned to him, and for the first time since the breakup she let him see her completely. Not the guarded version she'd been presenting, not the professional mask she wore at work, but the real her, broken and healing and still standing. "I'm sorry too," she whispered. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you. I'm sorry I made that choice alone. I thought I was protecting both of us, but maybe I was just protecting myself." Edmund reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and when she didn't, he wrapped his arms around her. Fiona collapsed against his chest and cried, really cried, for the first time in months. He held her and cried too, both of them mourning what they'd lost together instead of apart. When they finally pulled apart, Fiona felt lighter somehow, like sharing the grief had made it bearable. "I'm not ready," she said, her voice still shaky. "I'm not ready to jump back into a relationship or make promises about the future." "I know," Edmund said. "I'm not asking for that. I just wanted you to know that I remember, that I honor what we lost, that it mattered to me, even though I never got to know about it when it could have made a difference." 3 months later, in April when the world was blooming again, Fiona invited Edmund to dinner at her apartment. She cooked, which surprised him because she'd always claimed to hate cooking. They ate and talked easily, the conversation flowing the way it used to. After dinner, Fiona led him to the couch and took a deep breath. "I've been thinking a lot," she said, "about us, about what happened, about whether we can ever get back what we had." Edmund waited, his heart pounding. "I don't think we can get back what we had," Fiona continued, and Edmund's heart sank. "But maybe that's okay. Maybe we're not supposed to go back. Maybe we're supposed to build something new, something different. based on who we are now instead of who we were then. What are you saying? Edmund asked carefully. I'm saying that I'm tired of being afraid, Fiona said. I'm tired of protecting myself from the possibility of getting hurt. The truth is, Edmund, I never stopped loving you. I was angry and hurt and I buried it deep, but it never went away. And these past few months spending time with you again, I've realized that you really have changed. You've done the work. You've proven that you meant what you said. She reached for his hand. I want to try again. Not to recapture what we had, but to build something new. Something stronger because it survived being broken. Edmund pulled her close and kissed her, a kiss that tasted like tears and hope and second chances. I love you, he whispered against her lips. I never stopped loving you, and I promise you, Fiona, I will spend the rest of my life proving that you made the right choice in giving me another chance. 1 year later, on a November afternoon that was cold but sunny, Edmund and Fiona stood together in a small garden. It had taken a year, but Edmund had built the memorial garden he'd designed, tucked away in a quiet corner of a public park. It was private but accessible, a place anyone dealing with loss could visit and find peace. Fiona stood beside Edmund, her hand clasped in his, looking at the bronze plaque they'd installed that morning. It didn't have names or dates, just a simple inscription, for the futures that never were and the hope that remains. They had been officially back together for 9 months now. It hadn't been easy. There had been arguments and setbacks, moments when Fiona's old fears surfaced and she pulled away, times when Edmund's guilt overwhelmed him. They'd gone to therapy, both separately and together, working through the trauma of what they'd been through. But they had made it work because they both chose to keep choosing each other, every single day. Edmund pulled a small box from his pocket. Fiona's breath caught. It's not what you think, he said quickly. I mean, not yet. I know we're not ready for that. He opened the box to reveal a simple silver ring. It's a promise ring. A promise that I will never walk away again. A promise that we'll face whatever comes next together. A promise that I choose you, Fiona. Every single day I choose you. Fiona's eyes filled with tears as he slipped the ring onto her finger. I choose you too, she whispered. They kissed there in the memorial garden, surrounded by late-blooming flowers and the sound of water from the fountain. Two people who had broken each other and found a way to heal together. As they walked out of the garden hand in hand, Margaret called. How did it go? She asked when Fiona answered. It was perfect, Fiona said, smiling through tears. Really perfect. Good, Margaret said, and Fiona could hear the smile in her cousin's voice. You both deserve this. You both deserve a second chance. Later that night, lying in Edmund's arms in his apartment, Fiona thought about the journey that had brought them here. The pain and the loss and the year of separate suffering. The terrible choices and the devastating truths. The slow, careful rebuilding of trust. Some things once broken can never be fully repaired. The cracks remain, visible reminders of what was shattered. But Fiona had learned that cracks don't make you weaker. They make you honest. They make you careful with what matters. They make you grateful for second chances, for unexpected reunions, for one glance across a crowded room that undid everything and somehow made it all possible again. What are you thinking about? Edmund murmured, half asleep. I'm thinking about how lucky we are, Fiona said, that we got a second chance, that we were both brave enough to take it. Edmund pulled her closer. I'm the lucky one. You could have walked away and never looked back. Instead, you gave me the chance to be better, to be the person I should have been all along. We're both better, Fiona said. That's the point. We both grew. We both learned. And now we get to build something real together. Something that's ours. They fell asleep like that, holding each other in the dark. Two people who had learned the hard way that love isn't about grand gestures or perfect moments. It's about showing up. It's about choosing each other even when it's hard. It's about being brave enough to trust again after betrayal, to hope again after heartbreak, to build again after everything has fallen apart. Their story didn't have a fairy tale ending, but it had something better. It had a real ending, honest and earned and full of possibility. And sometimes that's the best kind of happy ending there is.